Hey everyone, welcome back to another video. In this one, I'm taking a look at Sabertooth with his new uniform and upgrade. The Wolverine video that people are hardly waiting for is still on its way. I'm waiting for the potential. I'm currently at 80%, so it should take at least another day to 3 days to be able to unlock the potential fully. Then I can do the testing at T4 and get that video out after. As a heads up, I mostly focused testing the character in PvP with various teams and builds because his PvE performance wasn't really that great, and as a result I limited his testing in PvE, more so because people are probably going to pick this uniform up for PvP if anything, and there are better options for PvE like Dr. Octopus that can go to T4. I initially tested the character with an Invincible Obelisk in PvE and PvP, and then ended up switching to a mighty CTP of Greed for PvP, but I hadn't really tested the PvE side yet, like the World Boss Legend and Giant Boss Raid, as well as the ABX, so that is also with CTP of Greed. I'll mention it again though when I show those clips so it's clear what I'm using. As with most characters that didn't have an upgrade before, they were just T2, I tested him in World Boss Ultimate, Thanos, and the respective other mode, depending on the type. So for Sabertooth, that is Proxima, since he's a physical type. But I noticed right away that without that T3 upgrade, the character was pretty abysmal in PvE, even with no damage proc. He barely finished stage 99 of Thanos, finishing with only about close to 30 seconds left. The T3 skill is where the majority of Sabertooth's damage lies, and with it he was able to improve the clear time on stage 99 of Thanos by almost 3 minutes, but his 5 skills or his base kit really doesn't do much of anything. He clearly does better versus Proxima because of the all defense down, but you could see from the Thanos fight that the base damage on his skills, excluding the ultimate, isn't really that great, and ultimately doesn't make the character really that viable for PvE. To put it into better perspective, I took him into a stage 39 of Null with a leadership and 2 supports if you count Red Goblin's support as well, and he also had a mighty CTP of Greed, and with all of this he was able to clear stage 39 of Null, but did it with almost 60 seconds left. To give you an idea of how bad that is, if you watched my spot video, you would know that I was able to clear the same stage with him, but with a worse leadership support combo, no uniform, and no damage proc. You can see that the character doesn't really have value in ABX either, with the most ideal setup with She-Hulk and Valkyrie that I can't even use on the Combat Villain Day. He was able to score 8.5 million with that mighty CTP of Greed, meaning that if I had no damage proc at all, he probably would have been somewhere around 7.5 or even 7 million, which is pretty bad for this particular mode. If you want to build the character for PvE, I would encourage that you don't, because he doesn't really add value to your account in any way. But if you really want to do that, then a CTP of Rage is likely your best option, because the character isn't very proc friendly. The rotation that I went with is to cancel your 1 and 2 skills quickly, then cancel your 3rd skill, followed by your 5th skill, which you delay cancel slightly till the animation starts, and then you finish off with the 4th skill. When you have access to your ultimate skill, you basically do the same rotation, except you cancel the 4th skill and finish off with the 6th skill at the end. Again, you can see that the character isn't really that great for PvE. I was able to do the first phase in that 2-minute window with that CTP of Greed, but at the same time I was able to do it even faster with Spot, and he has no damage proc at all or uniform again. The character's real and only value lies in PvP. In this first batch of clips that you see, I tested the character with an Invincible Obelisk to see how a defensive or survival based build would do, and you can see that he was able to take out 1 life of gore, but he struggles pretty hard to be able to take out both, and has a lot of trouble versus some meta characters with strong builds like Thanos, Jean, and Adam Warlock that he has a type disadvantage versus. This is really unfortunate because the character has a stacked PvP kit, especially if you have his artifact. He has guard break immunity natively, as well as 40% damage mitigation and the immortality effect, on top of passive healing, 40% penetration to all sources, as well as an iframe ignore with the mockery effect, meaning that you can stop the opponent's invincible effects even further, and on that skill he also has the ability to remove his own debuffs for 1 second. Even though the character is facing T4 opponents, he should be able to dominate them pretty easily regardless of the build, but unfortunately that's not the case for 2 main factors. One of them is because his kit, skills 1 through 5, just do a very miserable amount of damage. He doesn't nearly do enough to be able to hit opponents and go through their health bar before their procs and things come up to help them survive. And besides that, his second skill is on such a short cooldown with that iframe ignore that his priority from the AI is just focused on that skill, and he doesn't go into his other skills that do more damage and is basically just locked into that without getting any debuffs from the other skills either. In these batch of clips, I'm using a mighty CTP of Greed, and you can see the drastic difference that it made in his performance. When I first looked at his kit, my initial thought was to build Sabertooth with a CTP of Refinement, since he has that guard break immunity, that passive healing, the pretty high damage mitigation passively, and that immortality effect if you get the artifact. I was thinking that he could basically just constantly be spamming that second skill to have that mockery effect and the iframe ignore and be really helpful as a kind of pseudo support in Alliance Conquest. But as you saw from the previous clips, when I tested him just with an Invincible Obelisk to see how he would survive, the opponent would basically just go right through the Invincible immediately, and the character survival was really not that great, on top of the fact that he basically did no damage. A Steel Authority could be somewhat better because you can try to stack up the mitigation high enough so you take little to no damage, and because you do get some offensive capabilities when the damage accumulation part activates. However, given his performance with the mighty CTP of Greed and the fact that he constantly spams that iframe ignore with the various damage procs, I would say that the Greed is the most ideal option for him in PvP throughout most of the modes. With Sabertooth, it seems that offense is really the best defense, which is what Greed lets you do, since you're able to attack quickly with that iframe ignore and with the CTP of Greed proc, and because you have the immortal effect, you can activate it multiple times and also get the benefit of that ambush effect too. You can see that with the Greed build compared to the Invincible one, he's pretty effortlessly able to take out both lives of Gore and even take out at least one life of Jean and even Adam Warlock. He also has enough damage and damage mitigation ignore to go through those Thanoses with the mighty and brilliant authorities, and even has enough burst damage to go through Hulk's high health pool. He also has enough burst damage with that ignore dodge and the damage proc to take out Spidey quickly before he does the same with his own invisibility, iframes, ignore damage mitigation, and the damage bonus that he gets versus villains. To be clear, the character is mostly just for Alliance Conquest. For Timeline and Otherworld, you basically just use the top 5 metas for those modes, but you can see that the character is pretty useful in Alliance Conquest. He's able to take out meta characters, or at least take out one life to wipe them, and was even able to proc Carnage's artifact, but ultimately ended up losing versus him. But that's mostly because Carnage players now have maxed out artifacts for the most part, and Sabertooth's isn't, so once that kind of becomes equal, it could be possible that Sabertooth ends up beating Carnage outright. To hard counter one of the Carnage sets, I ended up using Colossus in the leadership as well as Wasp to get that debuff removal, and you can see that he was able to activate Carnage's artifact pretty quickly and survive long enough to be able to complete the fight entirely this time. I still need to test the character out a little bit more in Alliance Conquest to see just how good he stacks up, but he seems pretty solid, especially if you pair him with a character that gives you some additional damage mitigation. As you saw in both fights, I paired him with either Polaris or with Colossus, because that damage mitigation stacked up with Sabertooth's own 40% gives you a pretty high amount, and with the healing that he gets and the immortal effect, and with the ambush effect and all those procs constantly going, it can make him a pretty good threat in Alliance Conquest. The recommendations for Sabertooth are actually pretty easy to make because he's so defined in his role. If you don't really play Alliance Conquest, the character won't really add value to your roster in any way, but if you do play Alliance Conquest, then he is a pretty solid addition if you can get that artifact and use something like CTP of Greed. I don't really think any other CTP options will give you as much value overall as a CTP of Greed, but that's really up to you and how you want to build him. I'd say that the character is somewhat disappointing overall because he is a premium character with a premium uniform, and you need his artifact. You need a lot of parts to basically make him work. and you can only use him in one particular mode. So in that case, he is kind of disappointing, and he technically should have been much better and more flexible given the kit that he has, but unfortunately that is what we were given. I kind of think the character does need a bit of a buff so other players can use him throughout most of the modes, and to do that they probably should increase the cooldown on his second skill so the AI goes through a better rotation, and just add more damage numbers and hits through his skills 1 through 5. The fact that I could only really use one build to make him work well just shows you how inflexible his kit is and why it likely warrants being buffed overall. That does it for this one. The next one is the Wolverine video that I mentioned, and a lot of people have been asking me how to build the character in general, and I'll be answering that in depth in that video if you want to know how to build him and what modes he excels in with what particular build. As always, if you enjoyed the video, please consider liking, subscribing, and possibly sharing it with others so they can also get some insight on this character and whether they want to pick him up or how they want to play him. I always appreciate people taking the time to watch my videos, so thank you, but the video is now over.